Thank you for joining us this morning, everyone. We're going to get started with a wonderful poem. CiCi.
Thank you. This piece is called After James Baldwin. Medgar, Malcolm, Martin. Let this be a holy trinity, made of gospel hymns and tragedy. Their lives, a record player of Black mothers mourning their lost son. Light always finds us bronze and broken, but this holiness is a mix of Black boy joy and a righteous tug of war. And we bury our soldiers in the thick of our skulls. This be in remembrance of their flesh and fury, a reminder of our flawed heroes. This is a poem of thanks, a poem of poppies showered with the blood of our lynched people, a eulogy of 3 powerful and beautiful Black men who gave their lives for the freedom in their eyes by any means necessary, whether it be fire or ceasefire, bloom or bomb. Peace and war, ain't it visceral? To see white hands break into Black bodies with billy clubs, fists, and flag, both Nazi and American, ain't it painful? To know that hate is taught, that little white boys opted out of heaven to serve the devil on earth on request from their mothers. Let us not pretend that the KKK is only men. There is a nation of white women with nooses hanging from covered cleavage, and how in the hell do I call this place home? But I want this poem to be communion. Take hold of this body of words and eat and embody this holy trinity drink of the blood spilled for justice, for Jordan, Jeffrey, Keith, Alton, Michael, Tamir, Trayvon, Laquan, Sandra, Deanna, Yvette, Chantel, Rakia, Ayana. Spit on the child, and you spit on this nation. Why must the bullet be so powerful, so movement striking, so body breaking? Witness these Black-blooded boys turn ancestors right in front of our televisions. Look the world in the face as if I have a right to be here. Flesh of thy flesh, bone of thy bone, created by you. Do you require a song of me? Very well then. Hear me weeping, a song of sorrow true. Send me a healer, bathe in southern rue. Tell me my flesh ain't been made in shame. Give me a song that don't just end in flames. Hear me weeping, a song of sorrow true. Send me a healer, bathe in southern roots. The sign read, nigger, don't you wish you were white? As if they were not aware of the hatred leaching off their skin. As if they did not invent the nigger. As if they did not envy Black blood, they must have. For they covered the grounds they walked on. In it, the story of the Negro in America is the story of America. It is not a pretty story. Medgar, Malcolm, Martin, amen, ashe, amen, ashe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, CiCi. Wow. My name's Robin. I'm the adult and teen librarian here at the Hercules Library. Thank you all for joining us. I'm just going to talk really briefly about the programs we have going on today and around this time, and then I'll hand it over to Allison for our real introduction. So if you're joining us at the Hercules Library today, we've got some really great book displays for kids, teens, and adults. You'll see them right when you walk in the library. And we've got our peace tree in the Sky Garden. We welcome you to write a message of peace. We've got little wooden doves and we'll hang them up. It's a beautiful day and they're floating around. It looks nice. And then for the kids, we also, and adults, we have a sidewalk chalk peace walk set up in the Sky Garden. So if you'd like to come add a colorful drawing, a message of peace, whatever it means to you, we welcome you. And a couple other things that you can do if you're not coming to the library today, we've got CiCi's book in our collection. I'm going to provide a link to that in the chat right now. And if you liked her poem, I highly recommend checking out her book. Oops, that was just to Allison. Let me send it to everyone. And then we've also got some really great resources on our website. We put them together for MLK Day, but they are applicable year round. We've got some really great book lists and some resources where you can do research. You can access primary sources. They're for all ages. So if you're writing, a report, you're in school, you just have curiosity, you're doing research, these are some great resources to check out. So those two links are in the chat. If you have any other questions about them, please feel free to message me or email me. You probably got my email with the link to this event. So feel free to contact me that way. And with that, I will pass it on to Allison.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before I get into the introductions, I'd like to introduce Pamela Perella. She's our interpreter today, and she's going to be interpreting the program in Spanish. Pamela, if you could give us the instructions.
Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. El día de hoy se van a proveer los servicios de interpretación al español. Para poder escuchar esta presentación en español, por favor le pedimos que en unos momentos miren la parte de abajo de su pantalla donde van a ver varios iconos. Busque el icono de un globo terráqueo si usted está usando una computadora, o van a aparecer 3 puntos suspensivos si está usando una tableta o un iPhone, y dele clic y seleccione su idioma de preferencia. Una vez que haya seleccionado su idioma de preferencia, dele Done y va a poder escuchar esto en español. Por favor, note que todavía no ha aparecido el icono de globo terráqueo, ya que yo no he sido asignada como intérprete todavía, pero va a aparecer en unos momentos. Allison, please, if you could assign me as interpreter.
Thank you. And there you go. So if anyone needs the interpreter channel, you can look down at the bottom and choose Spanish on the little globe, and you should be able to hear Pamela, and she will be over there interpreting. So thank you. Again, I want to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a wonderful program today, and I would like to first just introduce our Hercules Mayor, Mayor Dion Bailey. He's going to give us a little bit of an introduction. We're going to introduce you to all our speakers and then start celebrating the wonderful Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday. Mr. Mayor Bailey.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this event. I'm so glad here at the City of Hercules that we have this great partnership with the library. We appreciate all the great programs that they put together for us, and this is just one of those. So I want to thank Allison specifically and her staff for putting this together, and all those that work so hard, again, for all those programs that we have here in the city. I'm excited to be here celebrating Martin Luther King's legacy. We talked a little bit about service. I think it's going to be discussed. Women and race work is going to be discussed today. So I'm excited to listen and to learn about that. We've had this event in Hercules now for many years. I don't remember it not being an event. I remember when it wasn't on Zoom, but I don't remember it not being an event. So it's been around for a while. I was able to participate back in 2018. It was the first speech that I was able to give as an elected official here in town. So it has a special meaning to me. I will say that I'll just touch briefly that one of my favorite speeches from MLK was his speech about what is your blueprint. And that has always been important to me. I think Martin Luther King was talking to middle school students at the time, which is about when I heard that speech for the first time myself. And he spoke about the importance of self-worth, believing in your somebodyness, and then about excellence, right? Achieving your own excellence. And I think that's really critical. And we have some great women here speaking today that have achieved great levels of excellence. And again, I'm excited to hear that. I do want to just say once again, welcome to the event. Welcome here to Hercules for those that are watching from afar. And I'll turn it back over to Allison for anything else she wants to add. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Bailey. The celebration has been going on in Hercules for a long time. It's something that we're so happy to be a part of at the library and to continue the tradition. And as Robin said, we have some wonderful things going on in person at the library and throughout Contra Costa County libraries. So please do join us. As information, the Martin Luther King holiday has been signed into law, was signed into law in January 1983. And I know a lot of us has been celebrating it ever since then and before. So thank you for joining us again. And I'm going to introduce our panelists, the folks we're going to be talking with today. This is a group of women that I've worked with in different areas of my library and personal work, and I just respect and appreciate them all and really am interested in conversation and what they have to say. So we have Tiffany Grimsley, who is graduate student advisor at UC Berkeley and Hercules City Council member. Tiffany, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. We have Dr. Lori Watson, who is the CEO of Racework, a group that we've been working with in Contra Costa County libraries. Dr. Watson has been providing the county library system with some wonderful race equity trainings for the past couple of years and continuing. So Dr. Watson, welcome.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. And we have CiCi Jevae, who is Media, Arts, and Cultural Manager, Richmond LAND, Artist in Residence, and founder of Melanin and Mimosas, which is a wonderful group that I suggest you check out. CiCi is also an author, and as Robin noted, we have her book in our collection. So thank you for providing your poems and being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Just in housekeeping, we're going to ask that everyone keep muted until we get to the Q&A section. We will leave some time for that at the end of the program. Feel free to keep your cameras on or off, whatever you'd prefer. We'd like to make this a nice discussion. And I would like to start the discussion off with talking about why we're here, the Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday. I've talked to each person a little bit individually about what this holiday means to them. And I'd like to just start with asking, what does it mean to you and why you wanted to be a part of this program, which we appreciate very much. So CiCi, I'm gonna start with you.
Awesome, thank you. So MLK Day has always meant a lot. I think just growing up, it was first just one of the few things that we learned about when it came to civil rights movement, when it came to really just acknowledging, the efforts of Black folk. But I think as I got older and started to understand this larger context, one, I think from a Greek perspective, I joined Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. So a lot of our work, of course, is community conscious, action-oriented organization. And knowing that MLK was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, a lot of my training just came in the sense of, okay, so this is one of the days that we celebrate, but what does it actually mean to act on a daily basis to better the community, to uplift, and to find the areas in which we struggle with, right? And so why I wanted to be here today is one, to just learn from the amazing women that are on this panel, but also get to really highlight a lot of the work that I get to do as a teaching artist, as a curator of events specifically for Black women and Black community, and then just the opportunity to sort of learn and figure out what are other opportunities to collaborate to, again, uplift the Black community in all the ways that we need to.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Dr. Watson, what about you?
Thanks, Allison. As I think about this celebration of Dr. Martin Luther the King, I like to call him that from Coming to America. I just think about, because of him, that's the reason that we're able to sit here and actually have this conversation. Or should I say, even more explicitly, this open conversation about who we are as Black people in this racist society. Before the civil rights movement, this conversation would have been taking place in a room somewhere with only folks looking like us listening. Maybe a few white allies or co-conspirators. But the day reminds me of where we have come from and also where we still need to go. And right now it's just so evident because we are still fighting for a lot of the same rights as Dr. King and the movement was. It's unbelievable. And telling my age, you know, giving that up a little bit, I remember when this holiday came to be. You know, I remember when we first celebrated it. I was a student at Tougaloo College, which is a HBCU in Mississippi. And Tougaloo was the cradle of a lot of what had gone on in Mississippi around civil rights. You know, it often served as a refuge for folks like Dr. King, Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, just to name a few. And so I remember with that connection of being this place so important during the civil rights movement, I remember the excitement of it all. And at the time I was enrolled in an African-American history class and beginning to learn more and more about the movement and our people, because of course it wasn't taught in our regular history class. And as I listened to CiCi share, someone who is much younger than I am, and as I listen to students talk about, you know, what they know about Black history, Dr. Martin Luther King, maybe Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, we don't go far beyond that. And so being in that place to learn about more folks and feeling such pride about the strength and the perseverance of who these people were was just really inspiring. But I have to say, I think the most impactful King celebrations that I've ever been involved in had to be the years that I lived in Atlanta. And I heard you earlier this morning, Allison, mentioning the King Center. And so being a part of the parade and listening to the speakers at the celebration who were actually involved in those marches with Dr. King, those celebrations were undoubtedly the most meaningful and most memorable of all. And so my wanting to be here today is definitely tied to wanting to share the space with these powerful people who are here today, and also to just continue to share the knowledge with others and receive as much knowledge that I can. This is just very exciting this morning. So again, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Glad to have you here. And Tiffany, I know we had a nice chat about what the holiday and the day and being here means to you. Let's hear from you.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm really honored by the invitation to be here and just really humbled to be in the presence of these incredible women who are doing so much to advance the information, the knowledge, the study of Black people, not just in the United States, but the African diaspora, and you know, just the healing process that is ongoing for African American people because of the trauma that we carry in our very bodies. I did share with you a little bit of my history, but I gotta say a couple of things before. Just CiCi, that poem was so powerful. I haven't come down from it yet. And I just wanted to piggyback off of something that Dr. Watson said, because I too remember when Martin Luther King Jr. Day became a holiday. It was in January of 1986. It was my senior year of high school. And I remember all of the passion and purpose, that the fight for the day. It was a fight to get this day. And it seems so incredible now. Like, why would anyone not want to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? But it was a fight. But my walk with Martin, as I like to talk about it, began as my life began. I was born the year that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. He was assassinated in April of 1968. And so I too am outing my age, Dr. Watson. And my parents took an ill-advised trip from California to Alabama in the summer of 1968, because my young mother, who grew up in California, wanted to meet the family of her new husband, who lived in Alabama, where my dad grew up. And they survived that trip, as did I, obviously. But I think when I think back on that and the courage and maybe the craziness that it took for them to take that journey and survive it and make it back to California. You know, I knew my life was meant to be. In third grade, I won the Martin Luther King Jr. Award at Emerson Elementary School. At that time, I didn't know who Martin Luther King Jr. was. I didn't know anything about Black history. In fact, I was in first grade when another classmate pointed out to me that I was of color. We didn't say it that way then, but she pointed out that another classmate and I in our very white school looked alike. Well, that student was Mexican. And so she came to me and she asked me if I was Mexican. And I said, I don't know, because I didn't know what Mexican was either. And somehow by the time I got home that day, I decided that I was in fact Mexican. So I was proud to announce that to my mother, who sat me down to tell me that I was Black. And I didn't understand that either. And we had that first conversation about Black identity. And I'm so grateful to my mother for talking to me at an early age, at a time when people didn't necessarily talk to their kids about their identity. But that introduction to Martin Luther King was beautiful because the award, the little certificate came, but the prize was the books about Martin Luther King Jr. And so I began to read and I began to learn, and that began to color who I was as a person. We had some conversation before this presentation began, and I talked about the isolation of growing up in a predominantly white community and knowing my otherness, but not embracing my Blackness. And it took until college, and took until I went to the University of California at Santa Barbara, where I was one of the 2% of African Americans in that school, for me to really know that I needed my community, I needed my culture, I needed my identity, and I went there as a communications major, ended up double majoring with Black Studies because I found myself just hanging out in the Black Studies department and taking Black Studies courses just so I could be a part of that community. The journey that I took led me to work in education, largely in admissions for the University of California, Berkeley, but specifically around diversity recruitment, outreach and recruitment, and yield, because there are so many people growing up, kids like me, struggling to find themselves and their identity, finding themselves in embracing their intellect, their power, their strength, in their purpose. And Martin is just the example. For me, he's the example, you know, because he was intelligent, he was handsome, he was a minister, he was an educator, he was a leader, he was a community organizer, he was fearless. He carried the fear, he talked about the fear, but he stood in face of the fear so that we all could stand here today and continue the journey and continue the struggle. My favorite quote from Martin Luther King Jr. was, it's a terrible thing to tell a bootless man to raise himself up by his bootstraps. And I mangled that horribly. But we can't continue to listen to a government of people that tell us, well, you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You have the opportunity. No, the struggle continues. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we have been, the panelists and folks have been having conversations about what it feels like to be other and to be a woman of color, the intersectionality of all of these different parts of our identity and how it feels. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I wanted to share, you were talking about books. When I was in college, I would literally go to the African-American section and hang out in that section of the library, because these were authors that I was familiar with that were comforting. All the Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and Gwendolyn Brooks and everyone, they made me feel comfortable and at home. So I'm glad you brought the reading part into it too, because that's what we're here for. Some other questions. I know I brought this group together intentionally, again, because this is the work that we are all doing in different ways. And what I wanted to talk about is the professional work that you're each doing, because you're all involved in the community, with youth, with adults, with helping people understand the world we're in and hopefully live in it a little bit better sometimes and more mindfully. So I'd like to have that discussion, and please feel free to pop in, panelists, and interact with each other too. But the question is, let's hear about your professional work. How did you get into it? What's your purpose? Who are you helping? I'm going to start with Dr. Watson, because this is someone that, again, is working with the Contra Costa Library System in a professional capacity, and we appreciate what you're doing. So tell us a little bit about.
Sure. I'll describe myself as an anti-racist. You know, it's not just what I do, but it's who I am. You know, it's a part of my being. But if I were to look at it as just the doing part, you know, professionally, but actually the personal impacts the professional, you know, I would look at it through my work as the CEO of my racial equity agency, Racework, where my intention is really to take people on a personal journey toward broadening and deepening their understanding of race, racism, and power. You know, I hope to elevate the personal racial consciousness in individuals so that they can in turn work toward becoming anti-racist themselves and begin to center equity and equitable ways of being. I entered this work, I started off as an educator. I was a teacher, I was an administrator for 20 plus years. In the South, I taught in Georgia and in Mississippi. And in 2005, I moved to California. And I began working in actually San Leandro School District. And this was a district that had been court ordered to do work around racial equity because of some situations, some incidents that had happened there. And, you know, I say by the luck of the draw, or it was designed for me to be there because I got engaged in this racial equity work that San Leandro was doing. I became a part of their district equity team. And San Leandro was actually partnered with an organization, Courageous Conversation. And so we would go to their national conference every year and present on the work that we were doing. And one of the times that we were presenting, the founder of Courageous Conversation actually came into our session. And so he heard me sharing, and afterward he said, I want you to create your own seminar. And I'm thinking, what? You want me to create my own seminar? And so we talked a bit more about it. And in the next conference the following year, I presented a seminar that I entitled, Trust Me, Gay is Not the New Black. And it looked at the intersection of race and sexuality. And I think I did that at that conference for maybe a couple of years. And then finally he said, you know, when are you going to come work for us full time? And so I did that. And I ended up working with them for about 5 years, all across the country, doing this work with school districts and corporate, you know, different organizations. And then in 2020, in the middle of COVID, we were all laid off. And I think it was during that quiet time of COVID, sitting at home, that it hit me. You know, you asked about this aha moment, because as people began to reach out to me about doing the work, you know, and I let them know that I wasn't working there anymore because we had been laid off, people were like, no, we want to continue to do this work with you. And so through calls and emails, I just began to get in this mindset of, hey, I can do this. Because this work isn't just about giving folks a book to read or a list of things that's going to shift their thinking and believing about race. It's also about relationship building. It's the trust, it's the process, this journey of adaptive change. And so I began to realize that apparently I had been doing that in my work, moving and impacting people in this positive way, so much so that they wanted to continue to work with me. And so I created this company, Racework. And what it is that I do is I partner with K-12 districts, with higher ed. I told Tiffany earlier, I said, I'm doing work on your campus. I'm actually doing some work with UC Berkeley. You know, I partner with organizations, corporate, nonprofit, and as you mentioned, you know, Contra Costa County Library System. And it's all about facilitating people along their own personal journey to reflect on their own biases, to hopefully have people recognize how we've been conditioned into these ways of thinking and believing about race. You know, racism is taught. That's what Nelson Mandela said. You know, we're not born hating people because of the color of their skin, their religion, their background. You know, we're taught to hate people. Again, we live in this highly racialized society, and every message that we get continues to reaffirm this hierarchical belief about race that places white on top, black on the bottom, and all these other races and colors in between. And so our work as anti-racists is how do we continue to challenge those beliefs, those biases that we unintentionally have? Because what I try to get people to recognize is that to perpetuate racism does not require intent or malice. Really good-hearted, well-meaning, well-intentioned people perpetuate racism on a daily basis. It just requires a lack of consciousness and a lack of knowledge. And so how do we get to this place where we have a willingness, where we have the capacity, where we develop the knowledge to self-assess, to really go to those places that some folks are just afraid to go to, you know, and think about race. And so what I want to do is, again, change outcomes for folks. And so my work that I do most often is working with educators, because I really want to create a new world for these children. Because I believe that when I send educators back into classrooms with these elevated levels of consciousness, with the skills to disrupt and interrupt racism, then I'm impacting the lives of those students, because the trajectory of their lives is changed. And so it's about working with educators to do that. And I also do work directly with students, where I'm helping them to develop these leadership skills to create change. And they get so fired up about wanting to do this work, which is so different than working with adults, because adults bring all this baggage with them around race. The kids show up in this SLAM program that I created, Student Leaders for an Anti-Racist Movement. They show up so fired up because they have this belief and this desire to change the world. There's an exercise that I do called the color line, where students are looking at the different advantages or privileges that people have based on race. And when students recognize the role of race and how, if I am a white person in this world, I have so many more advantages and privileges just simply based on beliefs that we have about race. And when they see their friend who is of a different race, you know, on another part of this line, they're like, what do I need to do to ensure that my friend who's having this less privileged, less advantaged life than I am, what is it that I need to do in order to create that change so we're all having this common experience? And it's just amazing when I do that work. And so again, you know, what I'm doing is really just trying to have people to dig into their own beliefs, develop the tools, develop the skills so that we can create a society in which equity reigns supreme. You know, not whiteness, that power system that has created these disproportionate outcomes that are just not where we need to be. But how do we create one where equity reigns supreme, where we're all getting our needs met, where we're all having an equitable opportunity to achieve at the same levels of success? So that's my role in this work.
And I always think of, from taking your workshops, I always think of one of the things you said to us initially, which is that, yes, this work is going to be uncomfortable, but that's okay. It can be uncomfortable. It's not going to kill you. So we need to work through that discomfort. And I feel like even having these conversations today with our library system, with everyone, it's helping in ways that just naming things and having the discussions is a good place to start.
Yeah, Allison, I'm glad you named that, because a lot of people get into this mindset of, I'm going to be unsafe, and we have to make sure we differentiate between feeling uncomfortable and feeling unsafe. And most people are, particularly people who are white, are safe in a conversation about race. It's discomfort that's surfacing. And so we have to learn to develop the muscle to lean into that discomfort so we can sustain the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Tiffany, I'd like to hear from you. I know you do your professional work at UC Berkeley, and you're involved in the Hercules City Council, and I know you're involved in the community. So how did you come here, and how do you bring Dr. King's legacy through your work?
Thank you, Allison. I hope to bring Dr. King's legacy through my work. As you mentioned, my background is in graduate admissions. I started working for the University of California, actually, while I was a student at UC Santa Barbara, working with the Office of Relations with Schools. And as part of my role with the Office of Relations with Schools, as I would contact prospective students who had yet to submit their statement of intent to register. And that kind of fueled in me, that kind of set me on a path, because what I noticed was that first of all, there were far fewer numbers of students of color that I was calling, and that the opportunities for those students were not as plentiful, not only in terms of educational options, but school choices, but in terms of things that were being offered to them as incentives for attending. That carried over into my experience as a student, where certain kinds of students were being permitted to have certain kinds of access and opportunity. I remember standing in line for my upper division courses, because in those days you had to do it in person, and people being advanced to the front of the line because of who they knew or the status they had in the environment, and things that weren't educationally based and certainly didn't have any air of equity. So that fueled an interest in me in working in education, and before I could name it as equity or anything approaching that, I knew that I needed to be a conduit to help other students like me. So I taught for a short while at Berkeley High School in Berkeley, California, before being hired by the University of California's Office of the President, where I worked for the MESA program. And so really kind of focusing on that K-12 track, to sort of to advance people toward competitive eligibility for acceptance admittance to a university level. And science and math are so important to that, so critical to that, because historically, African-American students and women have not been motivated to or encouraged to pursue math and science. I can recall from my own high school days doing really terrible in a trigonometry course, and going to my instructor with a D on my exam and saying, help me. And he literally patted me on the shoulder and said, "You're doing fine." So, where was the bar for me? Why was I not expected to excel? And so this is, I began to realize that this is happening not just for me. I was not an isolated case. This was the culture that we live in. You're a woman, you're Black, you don't need math and science. You're going to sit at a desk somewhere and type letters for me. That is changing. that is changing thanks to programs like SLAM, thanks to programs like MESA, thanks to a host of other programs that we had to develop ourselves. And that was the message for me, is if you want to change it, you have to do it. If you want to see it, you have to be it. So working for the University of California, I transitioned into working for graduate admissions for the business school. I became their assistant director for MBA admissions. And I took on diversity recruitment as my project. And I did this right in the wake of Proposition 209, which took away my funding, because Proposition 209 that was implemented in 1999, I think, said that we could no longer consider race or ethnicity in the application and admissions process. So it was taken off the applications. So now students of color who might have had some opportunity just by, it being considered that this person, as a person of color, might have had some additional challenges in the educational process leading up to this point, that was no longer a consideration. I could no longer tell unless, there are no special giveaways. Contrary to common belief, there are no special giveaways in African-American names. You might think that, I don't know, Shaniqua Jackson is Black. You might assume that she's Black, but she may not be Black. And that is, speaking to our own, as Dr. Watson was talking about, our own biases, our own internal racism that we carry with us based on this fallacy of race that was created in this country and the power structure that aligns with it. So I took that to the university level. I'm now working with the grad program for electrical engineering and computer science. And so I'm continuing that focus on African-American students in particular, but students from other underserved, underrepresented groups that lack the privilege and the presence and the power to gain entry into top-rated institutions like Berkeley. I can recall as an assistant director for MBA admissions at the Hospital of Business, having a phenomenal candidate who ultimately was not admitted. I've interviewed him in London. I was allowed, this is the kicker, I was allowed to travel across the globe to interview outreach recruit students. But I could not do that recruitment in my own backyard because Proposition 209 said I could not specifically recruit people of color. But I could recruit internationally in France, in Spain, in Tokyo, in Brazil. I could go almost anywhere else in the world, but I couldn't go to Richmond or Oakland. We didn't have funding for that.
That stings.
The other piece to my work was working in nonprofit organizations. I've worked with organizations like Opportunity Junction, with SparkPoint, with Dreamcatchers. These are all organizations that do outreach to individuals who are displaced from the workforce, giving them opportunities to gain skills, to have, SparkPoint in particular recruits contractors, coaches from other agencies and houses them all in one place so that people can get financial coaching, credit coaching, career coaching. And so really kind of doing work within communities that are traditionally underserved so that we can build wealth. The goal of SparkPoint is to gain financial sustainability by getting a job, by working on building your credit rating, by learning how to manage your spending budget and your savings budget. So I was really privileged to do that work, and while also, doing my work around education and encouraging students of color beyond the status quo to reach higher. So I was talking about a specific case with the Hospital of Business, this young man that I interviewed in London, who was working for Goldman Sachs and was just all kinds of incredible, but in the recruitment process for Berkeley was not admitted because of a lower GPA. Which there were a lot of contributing factors for, starting with the fact that he worked a part-time job all throughout high school to help support his single mother and his 3 younger siblings. He also, while having that lower GPA, still managed to participate in a host of activities, including tutoring other students. So it wasn't that he was not intelligent or academically capable. He just wasn't able to do all the work to achieve the grade. He was ultimately not admitted. He was admitted to another top business school. And 3 months after the start of school, I was in the grocery store and looking at a magazine, and Black Enterprise magazine had this man on the cover as in the top 30 under 30. He's gone on to do incredible things, have a family of his own, but that's what we're missing out on when we pass over people who don't look like we think they should look, or don't have a name that sounds like what you think the name should be, or hasn't reached the top of whatever it is you're measuring by. We miss out on people like him. So that's what my work is about. My work is about outreach, getting people to the places they were always meant to be, just being a helper along the way. I sit on the city council now in the city of Hercules. My primary reason for being there, not only to serve my Hercules community, which I'm very proud to do, but also the issue of visibility, because if you don't see it, you don't know that you can be it. So I want all young African-American women and girls out there to know that they can do anything that they choose to do. If you choose to sit on a city council or take some other political office, you can do it. If you choose to go achieve higher level of education, you can do it. The barriers are artificial. You don't have to embrace them. Thank you.
Thank you. And to your point about education, it's a conversation that we've been having in the library community, what it takes to be a librarian to get that classification. And normally you would go through a 2-year master's degree program to get the Master's of Library and Information Services. Since we've been doing this work in Contra Costa County libraries, the County Library and Board of Supervisors have made the decision that education and experience can substitute for that degree, because we are trying to recruit more people in the world, a more diverse group of people, and recognizing that it is not always attainable to go to school, get a 2-year degree, pay for it, all of these things, in addition to going to undergrad to be a librarian. And there's many of us that have been in the world for a while that do other things to get there. So we are trying to look at how we recruit and retain our staff as well to get to a more equitable, diverse place. So thank you. CiCi, let's hear from you. How did you get to this professional place, and what are you doing in the world?
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm really enjoying the conversation. I have been furiously writing down notes because there's just so much in this conversation. And I think the simplest way to put it is that my work is to dismantle white supremacy, right? And that looks like so many different things, but I think my work is really going to those places that we forget that it exists, right? We were having a conversation earlier about To Kill a Mockingbird and how it is a completely different version than the original that's being taught in schools now because of the N-word. And so a lot of my work is getting to work with young folks to talk about the realities of race, right? In ways that schools are just not doing. And oftentimes, we have parents who are exhausted working multiple jobs, or single parents, and they don't have necessarily the time or energy to even have these really intense, vulnerable conversations. So young folks are going into school, receiving half an education, and then coming to the youth center. So I work as the media arts and culture manager at what is called the Rise Youth Center in Richmond. And I specifically teach spoken word and really just anything theatrical, but half of our workshop is literally talking about what happens in school. What are they teaching you? What do you know to be true? And what are you struggling with, right? And a lot of that has to do with race, right? A lot of it has to do with, what was already shared around, I know that they're treating me different, right? I know that they don't think that I'm capable. And when I tell y'all, these students are beyond incredible, right? Like they are beyond intelligent. And one of the programs that we actually got to create about a year ago is called the Youth Poet Laureate position. So Richmond is known, of course, for having a poet laureate, but it was the first time ever that we gave this massive title to a young person, which, is completely delayed. Should have been a thing a long time ago. But this young person, her name is Sheila McKinney, who became the first Youth Poet Laureate, got to go on Fox 2 Channel News. And when they asked her to perform a poem, she wrote a poem from the perspective of a police officer's gun. Right. And it completely shocked everyone. And I just remember being so, doing too much at the TV, just like, yes, go off, say the words, because here are these two reporters who are thinking, oh, this little Black girl, she'll write a sweet poem. And it's like, no, let me tell you about what I know, right? I'm growing up in a society where we are literally being gunned down. It doesn't matter if it's not happening in Richmond, and it is, right? But these larger cases are happening all over the world, and these young folks are affected. And the fact that we're like, oh, well, keep going to school, learn this education that has nothing to do with you, and the education that does have to do with you. We're going to say, MLK, and, we'll talk about Rosa Parks, but we're not going to talk about revolts, right? We're not going to talk about all of these really powerful people who really led these major movements in ways that, quite frankly, white folks did not like. Right. So again, the work is around like, what are these systems and ways that we actually need to just dismantle white supremacy? And for folks who identify as white, like I'm looking for folks who are accomplices. And what that means is your ability to be aware that to dismantle white supremacy means that you are going to lose some resources, you're going to lose some privileges, and you are absolutely okay with moving forward. Right. I think that we've had a lot of conversations around what it means to be an ally versus an accomplice. And where we're at in this movement, ally is not enough, right? And we have to be clear that this is still a racist society, right? Like I have a mentor who wrote a poem dedicated to MLK that starts off with literally saying, they'll kill you and make a holiday of it, right? Like we forget that MLK was not, he wasn't killed for no reason. He was killed because he was doing some powerful work, moving masses of Black folks and folks in general. And, the US is like, all right, well, a couple years down the line, we'll celebrate it, right? And we know as Black folk, and I think folks who are accomplices, we know that it's so much more than that. But we can't forget. I think that folks will definitely try to give a watered down version of who MLK was, right? And we know that at the end of his life, so many things were shifting. I gave this in a poetry prompt, but he essentially said something along the lines of, I fear that I've led my people into a burning house, right? So we're very clear that MLK knew exactly that, what's happening it wasn't his intention, right? We're moving into this society and so many people are trying to be liked and trying to be these timid, quiet versions of who we actually are. And our fight is so much more than that. His fight was so much more than that, right? And so in context of my work is, of course, getting to work with young folks and teaching poetry, which really in turn is like, how do we talk about race in these really powerful ways? And then they go home and they're having these conversations with siblings, parents, and I get calls from parents all the time, like, what are y'all learning in this poetry class? Because they're coming with these powerful words. And it's really remarkable. And one of the programs that I run that is, it makes me really emotional. It's such a beautiful program, but I get to work with incarcerated young folks in the county teaching a hip hop and poetry class, right? And when we talk about these really intense topics, we need to speak it in their language, right? Young folks and everybody, right, grew up around music, right? Whether that's hip hop, R&B, whatever it is, we bring those tools so that young folks, especially folks who are incarcerated and sort of like live in a certain narrative of themselves, right? They're being called by last names or numbers, or it's an incredibly dehumanizing experience. And so it's bringing in this different language. You get to name yourself. Like everybody in this space, if you're an officer, if you're a student, if you're a teacher, we go by our first name, right? Like this is a space of humanizing. And I think a lot about, what Tiffany was saying in terms of like, when you want something done, when you want to change something, you have to do it. And what immediately popped into my mind, one of my favorite humans is Fannie Lou Hamer, right? Like this is a woman who, and I'll share a piece later, but I'm still in awe of her ability to be like, yeah, I said I'm coming to vote. Like I don't care what the barriers are. I will keep coming back. And you can literally physically assault me. You can try to put these laws up. You can have presidents talking crazy. But you know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have all of these literal acres of land that I'm gonna acquire for Black folks to own, and I'm gonna keep coming back and keep coming back. And that spirit is really what I try to instill in my young folks, you know. This is the last thing that I'll share in this moment, but something that Dr. Watson said was, you know, it's about relationship building, right? And that's the simplest way to put the work is I literally get to just hang out with young folks and community members and build relationships, because when we love on each other and we trust each other, then we're able to really move things in this movement, right? So much of our community oftentimes is, you know, riddled with grief and trauma, and we sometimes end up pitting ourselves against each other because that trust and that love doesn't exist. And we can't even focus on this outward force that's constantly trying to tear us down because of what's happening. And we know that is no coincidence, right? Like we could get into the creation of ghettos, right? And that's a whole other history lesson, right? It's all intentional. But what is our work in that? And so my work in the simplest ways, whether it's Melanin Mimosa, creating spaces for Black women, whether it's with my students, I do work with Richmond LAND, which is literally having conversations with Black and Latinx folks to talk very openly about anti-Blackness in that community, right? And all of our communities, but oftentimes we say people of color and we forget like there is so much turmoil even amongst people of color, and we have to name it. We have to name it before it can actually go somewhere. So it's about, you know, building those relationships. It's about having the energy and the power to move the work that you want to see change. And it's ultimately about dismantling white supremacy and being okay with whatever that comes with.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we
Can I just jump in, Allison?
Please do.
Say,
Yeah.
I gotta get CiCi with Slam. CiCi, we'll be talking to you, because that's definitely the work, and the way in which you name, you know, the masses wanna paint Dr. King in a certain light, like, you know, judged by the content of our character. He wasn't talking about, Dr. King was the ultimate critical race theorist. Folks just don't recognize that. So we are following the lead of Dr. King and what he was naming and stuff. But yeah, sounds like the work you're doing with kids is powerful, and yeah, I could definitely see us doing some work with those young people. I just wanted to jump in to say that.
I'm glad you did, because we're about creating community and connection. So I think that would be a wonderful partnership. And CiCi, we were going to hear from you if you are good for that. Now we have your poem up next, Everything I Know. Would you?
Yes, thank you so much. And this conversation is so important. You know, we talk a lot about Dr. King's legacy, and like it's also important to talk about Coretta, right? Because without her, there is no MLK, right? In a lot of ways, and there is no Fannie Lou Hamer. Like all of these women are super important, and so this piece is really my coming into what it meant to be a Black woman in this movement and in this world. Everything I know about being a woman, I learned from inside a bruised womb. Words cradled, cuddled, corrupt causation for curses. I learned from listening to the cadence of cries and crises. Crept in moments of weakness. She welcomed you back home. Everything I know about being a woman, I learned from denim skirts and church. The way the choir sang me whole, even after they disappeared my innocence. I still open my mouth to sing your name and ask you to love me past this hurt, this time. My God, I saw blood as a sacrifice my body would keep pouring out. They smiled at me and said, well, you're a woman now. As if being a woman was only about blood, only about championing the pain, only about smiling while breaking, sitting pretty while pouring from the inside sometimes. I write love letters to my body, and maybe they are all the ways I never learned how to say sorry for letting hurt and not letting healing. What I know about being Black, I learned from stapled tongues. What grandpa calls tough love, cause I gotta teach you pain before this world does. I learned Blackness to be a blues song, skipping on a faded record. How beautiful it is to see you bruised and bloody. Tell me again how your great-grands picked cotton, pricked fingers and stood still while trees were painted on their backs in the most gruesome way. Tell me again how your ancestors braided maps into scalps and yet still stood defeated after whispers escaped into the wrong ears. Funny how words trigger bullets, trigger bodies, trigger Bibles, triggers flesh to dust, and you return, disappearing your Sankofa. What I know of being a Black woman, I learned from my mother's boasting, her vanity, audacity to live so freely in a world that only loves the ancestor in her. I learned from the smirks of men who think of feminism as the worst joke ever told, from small men who mock their forefathers every time they look past an opportunity for knowledge, from insecure men who hate anyone living freer than them. What I know of being a Black woman, I learned from the most unladylike of girls that call themselves God in every room they enter because it is the truth. I learned how to overturn my invisibility cloaked by men, how to be so much more than my appearance, how to be full moon in a room full of sheeps and wolf clothing. I am honey in a room of bees. And yet, to be a Black woman is to be desired and unacceptable, pretty and too loud, fisted and fiery, folklore and fantasy, and surely some sort of free. Ashe, thank you.
Thank you. I feel like, Tiffany, I always need a moment to come down from the poetry. That was wonderful. I appreciate it very much. We're going to move on in discussion, but I do want to note that it's 1 o'clock and we want to save some time for audience questions and answers too. So I'm going to go through kind of the questions we had prepared. I want to dive straight into this because we've been talking about Dr. King's legacy and the work that everyone is doing. And I know for all of us that work changed, pivoted, came to a completely different meaning after George Floyd was murdered in the summer of 2020. And I would like to talk about that. Tell us a little bit how your work changed, how you changed in approaching your work and approaching the people that you work with after that moment. And I will start with the library system and just note that we had the EDI group, the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion group, which I'm the co-chairperson of prior to summer 2020. But it wasn't until that moment that we really began to solidify as a group and come together, have discussions with our leadership about what it meant to be a Black person in this country, a Black woman in this country. And that's when we also connected with Dr. Watson to start really having these discussions to lead to some more healing and knowledge and equity. So that's where we are kind of entering the conversation. Dr. Watson, if you could chime in there, how did your work change after that?
Thanks, Allison. You know, I think about the situation with George Floyd and, you know, people naming this as we've come to a racial reckoning or whatever it is. We've heard so many ways people have described it. And from my perspective, I think about so many people out there, you know, racing to buy books, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Dr. Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, and I want to be involved and I want to learn and joining in marches and protest. And now I look 18 months later and I'm looking around and I'm like, where is everybody? People have gone back to business as usual. And so I think about this work that I've been doing that was going on before George Floyd is still going on, because what happened with George Floyd was happening long before George Floyd. And it's still going on today. And so the work of anti-racism, you know, will always be. One of my colleagues said, you know, his tagline is, since racism won't stop, we won't stop. And so I think about that in terms of this, because I think what happened in that moment, and I know we've heard this over and over again, everyone was captured about this situation because we were in the house for COVID. I don't believe had we been in COVID, it would have created this large response, because we've seen this over and over again. And there have been so many people who said, well, I didn't know until this, but we knew long time ago. We watched Rodney King get beat in the streets 30 years ago. And so this isn't anything new. But what I do believe that it has done, and as I talk about how it's impacted my work, I do believe that it impacted people in a different way, wherein because of the large numbers of folks who did want to move into a different level of consciousness and knowing, I think what it did was bring those who are in opposition to this work to another level of consciousness and action as well, because that's why we're seeing this nationwide uprising against anti-racism work. That's why we're seeing this uprising against critical race theory. You know, the powers that be are recognizing that more people are becoming more aware of how insidious white supremacy is, of how insidious racism is, that it's not just about these personally mediated incidents that happen, but how it's just baked into the foundation of our society, how it's just baked into it in such a way that it's become normalized. It's invisible, ways in which we don't even recognize it. It's in our policies, programs, it's in our traditions, it's in our celebrations, that we don't even know that it's there anymore. And so what I believe about the George Floyd incident is that it's created because of people wanting to learn. Now we want to prevent people from knowing more. And so when it gets to the place where people are enacting laws and legislation to prevent people from learning, that just continues to, I mean, people are getting fired because they mention race in a classroom as teachers. You know, they don't want people to use monies in certain to talk about anti-racism. I think it's Florida, where you can't do anything that makes white people feel guilty about being white, where they can't be made to feel uncomfortable about being white. And so all of this is an intentional push to prevent people from learning so that we can continue to push back against the status quo. And so it hasn't really changed how I approach my work, because again, I've been doing this work and will continue to do the work. But what it has done is, because it's on the forefront of everybody's mind, it's made it a bit more challenging, in that people are more aware and people are more resistant and pushing back. And so what I'm seeing is that I'm definitely being bashed more in the media, school board meetings, conversations at large, because I am the face of the person who is leading this work. And so what I have had to do in a lot of situations is just really be a bit more transparent about what this work is and what it's not. And so really ensuring that people understand that this work is not about making white people or white children feel bad or guilty about being white. You know, this is about how do we collectively across all races come together and have these conversations to break down these silos, you know, based on these constructs of race. What it is not about, you know, making people feel bad about or talking negatively about the United States, or indoctrination, or all these different things that have been made up about what this work is. And so I've really been explicit in naming, this is what this work is, this is what it's not. Again, this is about us coming together collectively across races, ethnicities, gender, identity, whatever it is, in order to, again, build those relationships and knock down those, to work to bring forth a counter narrative that works against those dominant narratives that have been constructed, that just continue to perpetuate, you know, these images and stereotypes about who people are simply based on race. And so it really has made me be more convicted about the work that I'm doing, because you know, someone sent me an image the other day, and we've all seen this image of Ruby Bridges walking into the school and the people surrounded and yelling and screaming. And so I think the image was something like, and I'm going to mess it up. So you're protesting to not tell the truth about, you know, what your ancestors have done or whatever. So it's almost as if we want to wipe out history, as if it didn't happen the way that it happened. And I'll look for that image so I can give it credit the way it was. But it's a time for us to tell the truth. We've got to tell the truth about who we are and how we got here. And so my role is to ensure that we do continue to tell that truth. Yeah.
Thank you.
Look for that.
Yeah. I'm going to send the question over to Tiffany and also invite you to, Tiffany has a poem to share with us as well. So please jump in.
Thank you, Allison. I really am letting Dr. Watson's words really marinate with me. I think what happened with me personally with the murder of George Floyd, and I think there is some truth to the fact that we were in the pandemic, we were all at home, we were kind of in a different kind of space. But when we watched that image on television and I held my breath, I had no words, I could not speak. I'll read the poem because what I did is write this poem. That day is when I wrote these words. And I apologize to everyone because I am not the orator that Miss CiCi is. I'm a writer, not an orator.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
But I titled it Rage and Pain. There's a rage and a pain I feel inside. There's a bitterness I can no longer hide. I'm a human being, the same as you. My life has worth and value too. I sleep and eat and work and pray. I add to the common good each day. Why must I fear for the ones I hold dear? Why must they live their lives in fear? Why must we beg for just one more breath or mourn each day over one more death? A change will come, that I do believe. But until that day, how many must bleed? Was the blood of my forefathers not enough? Must those charged to protect still be so rough? When will my life matter to you? What if the one begging to breathe was you? Open your eyes to our shared humanity. What, my friend, will be your legacy? When and where will you feel my rage? And how will you help make the change? Writing those words was all I could do to deal with that moment. But coming out of that, I embraced what Dr. Watson was talking about, and that is my authenticity. I had a reckoning with myself because I think life is a journey toward becoming whoever it was that you were created to be. And so I took that, not the next step, but the next leap, because what I recognized in myself was that I was still doing what a lot of people have been taught to do. I was still apologizing. I was still trying to be pleasant. I was still trying to be accommodating. I was still trying to appease. I was still overcompensating for stereotypes about Black people. I was still concerned about what you think. And I had to let it all go. It made me certain that I wanted to sit on the city council in Hercules. It made me certain that I wanted to continue working toward increasing the number of African-American students pursuing higher education. It made me certain that I needed to continue work with nonprofit organizations so that we were increasing in our economic stability and building wealth in the Black community. So that's how my work was changed.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And thank you for sharing the poem with us as well. CiCi, let's swing it back to you. How did your work in your life change?
First, I just want to say that that poem is sitting in my heart. Like, I feel sort of heavy, but just in a grounded way. And I really appreciate those words. Thank you for that. I'm thinking really just marinating on everything that I heard and again, writing notes. I think one of the things that came to mind in that time for me was, it was just put on a big pedestal, right? This truth that we already knew, that you could be killed and it would still be justified, right? And I think that I'm, thinking about the white folks in my life, watching it, and definitely got those comments like, I didn't know this was happening. And I was like, like there are lynchings still taking place today, right? But the major thing is two things, right? The pandemic, everybody's at home. And then two, cameras, right? Like videos have not been a part of history. Like we have not, we have accounts, but we don't have the footage in the same way that we do today, that in many ways, can be helpful in terms of people being able to see the reality. But at the same time, it, for me, was completely debilitating, right? I am on social media witnessing Black death after Black death after, and it was like, it felt like a reminder again that, my life didn't matter, right? And then I'm working with young folks who are like, look at all of this. Like, how do I continue to show up? How do I continue to really do this work? And so a lot of my work was really just around even creating like stories and narratives around other ways to speak this truth, right? Like video cannot be the only way. And we have to name that it's harmful, right? Even mentioning, Rodney King, like so much of that was caught on camera, not the best quality, but it was debilitating to people. It's not like we don't know that this is happening, right? Or images of folks swinging from trees. We know that that's not going to change anything. And I think it's that weird reality that folks need to see us bleeding and in pain, to sit with the reality that this is truth. And Dr. Watson, I think this is something that you said just around like this idea, like folks don't actually want to be confronted with it, right? Like if there's a video, then people have to say, wow, I thought that was, history. And it's like, no, it's been happening. It never really stopped happening. And now I need you to confront it and take it seriously, right? And so it's this idea sort of added to that, being pro-Black is not anti-white, right? And that's something that we have to really name, is that I get to have pride in who I am, because I live in a society that's tried to take all of my history and close it into slavery, right? Like there was not all of these things happening prior to that. And I'm not saying that you can't be proud of who you are, but acknowledge your history, right? And so that's when we get into these conversations around Black power and white power, vastly different. KKK, Black Lives Matter, vastly different. You cannot compare the two, right? You can't say that both are hate groups, where one is literally, both of them are still movements happening today, but the KKK is literally active and trying to harm folks. And if we get into it, there are KKK members who are deeply in politics, right? We had one for a president. Let's just be clear about it, right? But the reality is that these things exist. Folks have to be willing to confront those things. And the last thing that I'll share is, I think my work really changed around being able to speak directly to the young folks who have always grown up in technology and have always grown up in social media. And again, like, how are we putting out a different narrative? How are we putting out stories of our joy? Because we absolutely deserve to speak to joy, right? And stories of our triumphs, stories of the revolts that did happen and continue to happen. And I wanted to this quote is always with me. Audre Lorde, and I'll drop it in the chat. I'm sure folks have seen this quote, right? For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And this is something that, Tiffany, you made me think of, is like, we try to fit ourselves into these boxes. And, I think especially, when Dr. King was leading the movement, everybody's in suits and ties, and, we're on our best behavior, all of these things. And it's like, while that is a part of the culture, that's not what's going to stop white people from using a baton or a gun, right? And so I just think about, like, we have to be creative in the ways that we are in this fight. And every person has a place in the movement, even if that place is not the same, right? Like, when you think about a rally or a riot, like, there are disruptors on purpose, right? Just like there's organizers, there's all those different things. We all have a place, and the work is, how do we bring ourselves together to organize and be centered in what our place is in the movement.
Thank you for that and for the quote. And I want to recognize Audre Lorde, also librarian. I'm very proud of that. You guys, we could talk all day, and I so appreciate everything we've talked about here. And I respect and just really love and appreciate you all for coming and having this conversation. I'd like to open it up and see if there are any questions from anyone that's in the audience today. If you'd like to turn on your camera, if you'd like to raise your hand, chat message in the chat, and we can answer that way. Please let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Sean is saying poems powerful. Thank you. I agree.
I do too. Makes me think of lots of ways we could work together in the future with poetry and Contra Costa County and good stuff. So, and we're going to close with another poem from CiCi as well, but I do want to just again give everyone a minute to chime in if they'd like to ask any questions. I also want to note, I'm going to send the link in here. This month's Black History Month theme, this year's theme is Black Health and Wellness. It's something that I think we've all been thinking about for the past couple of years. How do we stay, well, hopefully forever, but the past couple of years, how do we stay healthy and sane and together and in this world with all of the things that are going on around us? So maybe one of the things we could each share quickly, because we have just a couple of minutes till we wrap up, and I'll see if there's questions, but how do you keep yourself grounded and feeling whole and well? One of the things I like to do, I love taking my dog for a big walk. We go all of the hills in Contra Costa that are so green and beautiful right now. And as soon as I get out there and it's quiet and just calm, I feel my heart rate slow down and my calmness sinks in. And then I read too. So those are my two things right now. Feel free to throw something out there. Tiffany, Dr. Watson, CiCi, what do you do to stay well?
Staying well is always at the top of the priority for me. Like a lot of other African-American women, I suffer from a chronic illness, multiple chronic illnesses, but I have lupus, systemic lupus erythematosus. So staying healthy is really key. So eating well, making sure I give my body rest, but to keep me mentally and spiritually grounded, prayer is a part of my daily life. And I write. I don't read as much as I should, but I write almost every day. And that keeps me centered.
That's wonderful. If you come by the library, I think Robin mentioned this in our teen room for teens, we have some bullet journaling that's going on right now with some writing prompts that CiCi provided. So thank you again for sharing those.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. I have 3: prayer daily, poetry, and travel. I have to leave as part of my wellness and explore life.
I agree. And traveling, there's so much we can do in the world, but even right now, when things are not so great in the world, California, I am always thankful for being here, for the things that we can do within an hour of our homes just to get out and be in the world. So Dr. Watson, what about you?
You know, my response to self-care is never where most people are. Definitely prayer. But you know, my way of dealing and managing is I just absorb myself into trash TV. That's how I disconnect.
That's good. That's a way to do it.
I just need it in my life, and I can just not think about anything that's too deep. I can just be entertained by the crazies on TV.
Our next conversation then will be the things, the shows that we watch, those hidden wonderful things that just make us happy.
Anything Housewives. Let's talk Real Housewives.
I have to say, Netflix that money was well spent at the start of the pandemic. And HBO Max and Amazon Prime and all the others.
All the escaping things, yeah. It looks like we do have a question. I'd like to just read this out. It's from Felicia Phillips. What makes the speakers hopeful? What, if anything, have you seen locally here in the Bay Area that gives hope that we are making progress towards racial equity, since issues related to voting rights and critical race theory don't have that same prominence here that they have in other parts of the country? So what's making you guys hopeful?
You know, I'll just jump in and say it's my work with students, young people. I think this next generation, you know, and starting with people at CiCi's age, I mean, I just believe that they are going to shift and change the ways things are in this country. They have a drive, a determination, a new way of seeing these things. When CiCi mentioned kids, these kids who we may see in school as being disconnected, why are they disconnected? It's because of how systemic racism is showing up in school. It's because of the biases that are being perpetuated against them all day, every day. And when you bring them into a place to have a conversation about something that's meaningful to them, and particularly about race and what's going on in this society, these are the most brilliant kids, and their thoughts and their perspectives and their creativity and insights around all of this. My hope, and I may not live to see it, you know, Dr. King didn't live to see the fruits of his labor, but I just have a sincere belief and hope that this is what is going to, I think we're getting to a place where, yeah, things are popping off all over the place. We're reaching that place where we needed to, I believe, to some degree. And I think change is going to come as a result of it. And, you know, I just hope somehow in the afterlife that I'm able to see what happened, you know, but that's my hope right there. That is definitely my hope, the young people and people like CiCi just taking charge of what's going on. And, yeah, I believe in it. I really do.
CiCi or Tiffany, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo that. And the example I'll give really quickly is that we have young folks who speak on their city council meetings. They speak in their school board meetings. And when I tell you, they command the room and they're so blunt and honest about the realities of their school. So if they can tell their school, I know that you're not teaching us correctly. I know that, you know, especially with COVID, like you don't care about the safety of us. If they can say that when it comes to voting and anything else, like they are coming for politicians. And I have no doubt that they are making change. My generation is definitely trying to pour in and do the work that we need to do. And so definitely hopeful.
Thank you. Tiffany?
From my perspective, I've really been excited to see the increase in the number of African-American people stepping into political positions. And in the Bay Area, from city to city on our city councils, not just in city council roles, but also in, you know, policy decision-making roles, showing up at congressional meetings and showing up and working in congressional offices or Senate offices. So you don't have to be in an elected position to affect change. And just the level of activism, particularly around policing, community policing, and, you know, just making sure that in your neighborhood, in your city, your town, you're being seen and respected, and justice is being served. I've seen an increase in that level of activity, and that's been exciting for me.
Okay. Thank you, all of you. We are at 1:30, and so I want to wrap up our program. I want to thank everyone for coming, for all of the wonderful speakers, for Mayor Bailey for joining us, for Pamela for the wonderful interpreting. Thank you everyone for being here. We're going to close with a poem from CiCi. We're going to stop the recording and we'll end today, and we hope to see you in the library and in the world. Take care, everyone. CiCi.
Thank you. Ain't nobody like Fanny, like a hard fist that blooms, hands bruised from cotton picking, a mind that sings the blues, a heart that pumps and pumps and pumps for our rights, like a Black woman, all brick house and weary, keeping a gospel song loaded in her throat to help the people cope. Fanny is the kind of woman who survives as jumping in a jail cell by men that could have come from her womb, and still she will burst into a brawl for them. And did I mention, Fanny is the kind of woman who stares racism down like the barrel of a gun without ever flinching. Fanny is the kind of woman who believes in the power of the people, the power of our voices, the power in our choices. She lived her life fighting for the right to vote. Fanny never got to be a mother. She underwent surgery to remove a cyst when white doctors performed a forced sterilization. When they can't break our bones, they shoot for our spirit. They have always tried to erase us, to shut us up, silence us. But here is a world of a woman that refuses to bow down after being beaten, disrespected by presidents, witnessing a lynching. There is nothing more that white supremacy can do. Can't nobody tell me nothing about Fanny, about her fight and fury, how she was the spirit of ancestors reincarnated, a Black goddess so loved and hated. In 1969, she founded the Freedom Farm Cooperative that grew to over 680 acres, giving Black folks land they could actually own. This from a woman who lived on a plantation. This from a woman denied the right to learn, to feel, to mourn. This a woman, an ancestor, a fighter, a legacy, all on her own. She said once, sometimes it seemed like to tell the truth today is to run the risk of being killed. But if I fall, I'll fall 5 feet 4 inches forward in the fight for freedom. I'm not backing off. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around. Turn me around, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I gotta keep on walking, keep on talking. I'm building a brand new world. So will you join me? Will you join me? Will you join me? I'm building a brand new world. Ashe, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank everyone. You guys all give me hope in this panel and discussion. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and close out the program. We're here at the library. If you have more questions, concerns, email us, and Robin will send out some of the resources we talked about today. So thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.